traveled to three cities: Johannesburg, South Africa; Nairobi, Kenya; and Berlin, Germany. And in each of those cities, the project spent a week. The project was spent a week there. Um, it included three artists: Awuor Onyango, who is here, um, Nyakallo Maleke from South Africa, and Aganza Kisaka from Uganda. So I'll go back to the Berlin Biennial and talk about that briefly. So the Berlin Biennials propose to face the present specifically, and in particular, to face what it referred to as the collective madness. I think you remember 2017 was on the back of the election of Donald Trump, and the women's movement globally had just exploded, still on the back of the election of Donald Trump. And prior to that, the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States was constantly returning and recurring from 2015 onwards. Similarly, the Rhodes Must Fall movement in South Africa and the Rhodes Must Fall movement in the UK was happening around 2016 and 2015 as well. And there were a number of other kind of difficult moments for gendered and racialized subjects. And I think that was one of the ways of thinking about collective madness in the world. Like, what are we doing with, in relation to these specific people who have been misunderstood somehow, within so the Berlin Biennials plan to face a present and its collective anxieties, its collective madness, was about attempting to resituate those misunderstood complex subjectivities, the racialized subjects, the gendered subjects, and the sexualized subjects, right? And in many ways, this was activated through the various student movements in and around South Africa. I promise I'm not going to be long at all. I'm just going to talk for 5 or so minutes and then let Awuor get into detail. But I want to talk about 3 different areas of the School of Anxiety, which was important. One of them was the curricula that was put together, the readings, in short, that were put together. The other was the site visits, and which Awuor will get into a bit more. And I think a third one I wanted to talk about was research, artistic research. So the notion of the curricula, which I'll begin with, focused, I think, on 2 different aspects. I think the curricula was shaped by the places we visited. So, for example, in Nairobi, where we went in early 2018, in February 2018, I assigned the book Facing Mountain Kenya, which was written by Jomo Kenyatta, who also was a former president of Kenya and an anthropologist. And it is an anthropological text, but it talks about the different so-called tribes in Kenya. And I think part of what we were engaging or facing in Kenya and looking at Kenyan politics specifically also had to do with tribe and tribalism specifically. And that's how certain people had been somehow erased, not just misunderstood, but really completely occluded or left out entirely. And then some other readings we had to do more in the context of like racialized subjectivity, thinking about specifically the influence coming from Black Lives Matter in the United States and what was happening in the US. So we read Claudia Rankine's book of poems, Citizen, An American Lyric. And I think it was just a way of talking about subjectivity, talking about like race in terms of the who is the racialized person, and what does it mean to be addressed as Black, and all of these kind of questions. And these questions recurred in South Africa, in Johannesburg. They recurred in Nairobi very differently. And in Berlin, they also recurred extremely differently. So they changed as we moved through the different places and sites, the readings changed, but also our questions about subjectivity like changed. You're not the same kind of racialized person in South Africa that you are in Nairobi, that you are in Berlin. So it keeps changing. And then very importantly, we also had readings to do with psychoanalysis. And I think those readings were by Aranie Fredenberg and Eileen Joy, who had basically given some remarks at a conference, I believe in Ireland, on unlearning. Specifically, the idea of grief and mourning as part of the learning process was very crucial. So that they made the statement about that you cannot undergo any kind of unlearning without grief. You cannot undergo any kind of learning, in fact, without mourning for what we've been holding on to, or mourning what we've, in some way, we're always going through a process of losing things as we gain more awareness of ourselves and our relationship with knowledge. And then specifically, I just want to touch on the site visits as well. The site visits were shaped in a sense, like when we were in Nairobi, we went to the cemetery, which is a kind of World War II memorial of soldiers that fought in the Second World War, African soldiers that fought on behalf of the UK in the Second World War, on behalf of Britain. And I think these were the Royal African Forces. Awuor, am I correct? And I think the King's African Rifles as well. And I think it was really shocking to see that soldiers came from Nigeria and from Sudan and Ethiopia, and they were all fighting in the Second World War. And so there was this memorial, but and then in South Africa, we went to Soweto, we went to the Hector Peterson Museum, where there's a memorial for Hector Peterson and the students who were killed during the protest, the student protest in 1977, fighting for the languages, the change in language. But I think I should end very soon. The site visits were also shaped in a sense by structures of postgraduate programs in curating, like the Royal College of Art, who have designed their programs according to students visiting different sites. And as similarly, the CCA, in San Francisco, also has a similar kind of approach, and that also having shaped programs like the ASICO Art School in Nigeria and the Independent Curators International Curatorial Intensive as well. And then, yeah, I think that in terms of artistic research, I think that question was much more of thinking, how can we look at artistic practice itself as a form of investigation? And I think we were thinking through artistic research, and the examples that I had personally were coming from Sylvia Kolbolski's, for example, An Inadequate History of Conceptual Art, how artists themselves can begin to design real kind of potent research projects that reflect deeply on the history of art, but also the history of a place. And so the research we did was also, it was artistic research, but it was also could be seen as valuable and contributing to general research or on a place and on specific topics of note. So yeah, thank you. On with that, I will pass it to Awuor.
Thank you, Moses. Hi, my name is Awuor Onyango. I'm a multisensorial artist based in Nairobi, and I was part of the School of Anxiety. So I'm just going to share with you some slides that show our trip and what we were up to. I'll focus on Nairobi and autopoiesis, which was one of the terms that we looked at during the school. We started looking at it in South Africa, in Johannesburg, when we went to the Hector Peterson Museum. And I thought it was quite interesting because at some point we walked into something that resembled a graveyard that had bricks that had the names of people who were lost during the uprising, the student uprising in 77. And that raised questions of memory and who's allowed into the memories and who's memorialized and what the cutoff point for that memory is. So for the Hector Peterson Museum, for example, it was that you had died during the uprising. That was the entry into, being memorialized in this space. And so with that, we came to Nairobi, and I had like two ideas of places to go. One was the war cemetery for African soldiers of the Second World War, because it sort of mimicked the cemetery in the Hector Peterson Museum for me. So the association was quite fast. And I think I have photos of us. That's Nyakallo, right here in the dark blue sweater. We were taking photos. The guard was very interested in why we were there. So she kind of followed us around because most people, it's really good gardens. So people go and take photos like for their weddings or go for picnics, or it's like people coming to find like their white ancestors in the graves. And we were actually engaging with the graveyard. So, the guard was like, let me tell you what I know, and then you tell me what you know. And also, why are you interested in these dead people? And she did tell us quite a lot about the sections, how people are buried, whether they were Muslim, how that's commemorated, how people are kind of buried according to regions, so, and also according to tribes. So you'll find like, this is where like the Luos are, and this is where the Nigerians are, and then it starts going to Sudan. So there's actually like a topography of that. And it's also really interesting just seeing, the kind of parallel again, where like the entry to memorialization is death, right? You had to have died during the World War to be remembered as someone who contributed to the Second World War in this way. And what did that mean? Because as I said, it's not exactly a place that's engaged with by many Nairobians. Very few people know it exists. The people who know it exists come in for like the great gardens. So there had to be a failure in memory there somewhere to have brought this up. And so coming from this, we started to read and talk around Freedom Corner and other figures who had been excluded, because the exclusion was the thing that was interesting for me, the people who were excluded from the memorial or the memorialization and how that exclusion happened. And this brought us back to the Freedom Corner 16, which is a project that I had been struggling to do. I think I did an essay for Serubiri before about it. But basically in 1992, on the 7th of July, which is Saba Saba here, it's now a holiday because of protests that led to multi-partyism. But like on that day, 16 women of varying ages from about 40 to 65 sat by a corner of a park that Nairobi is built around called Uhuru Park. And they started a 5-year protest that led to like the release of 51 political prisoners. This corner was then named Freedom Corner. And unfortunately, this story is now memorialized around the Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Wangari Maathai, which is wonderful, but it was 16 women who were not Wangari Maathai who started this protest, carried it out for 5 years in various different places, and they were unnamed. And they were unnamed for important reasons, which is that at the time, because we were under a dictatorship, anyone who could be named, their family, their extended family, the people they worked for, would be in danger, right? But I felt that we were now in a space where maybe those names could be said. They could come to life. Like it was now safe to be able to name who the 16 women were. And so I was finding ways, both artistically and in research and in essays, to be able to name these women. And just give me a second as I put these slides up. So for part of our, I guess, intervention in Nairobi, we ended up going to Freedom Corner. We ended up, there's now 16 trees there, which is an interesting way of remembering who these women are. And we did a ritual of memory where we were able to interact with the trees. I was just talking to Moses about how it felt like we took on the ecological anxiety that the corner is now remembered for, because the corner is now linked to Wangari Maathai, who continued her fight for the green spaces in Nairobi, which we still thankfully have. And so while we were there was, state presence, there was police there who were, again, confused by what we were doing because we were running thread through the trees and binding them together. And I think we all kind of took on the anxiety of not just like the 16 women who came together, but like also the general anxiety of Nairobi as a city. And so we went through these sort of photos, we went through the figures who are unnamed, the figures who like memory rejects. And it was very interesting because the erasure wasn't just because these women were women to start with. It was because there were women who weren't as educated as Wangari Maathai. It's easier to remember one woman's name than it is to remember 16 women's names. It's women who were considered traditional, like they'd gone through certain initiations that made them not modern enough to like be worthy of like memorization. And just being included into the general public's memory. And so it was important for us to like be there and honor them and be able to name them. So that's what we did for the Nairobi leg. And with that, I'd like to read something from the publication. It's part of something that I wrote just about our general experience. And it says, what does it mean to be more than what you're reduced to want to be more, to suddenly sprout, become more, other than what you're sanctioned to become? Perhaps death is a continuum as opposed to an end, and we die every day in the eyes of those who let us, who allow us to be opaque and approachable, who address us not as phantoms of reduced former selves, slaves, savages. Is it to us to mourn the ways in which we die to our former selves? We become and unbecome. Or is it to those into the words, labels, boxes they prepared for us? The decision to stay put for those who bear us witness, who see us change or grow or shrink, who see us move away or towards, who cling onto our past selves, desperately trying to beat us back down, comfort of others, much like the decision to grow, change, transgress for our own comfort, result in death and therefore mourning. Everything is lost all the time. There is no catharsis in continuums, no transparency in the margins. There is freedom in the margins, an ability to move in whichever way without attachment, without labels, without closure. There is anxiety because of this freedom, discomfort informed because we are taught to fear what we cannot name, what we cannot see through, what we cannot grasp, what we cannot point at. And with that, I think I'll open the floor to questions.
Yeah, if anyone wants to ask a question, the speakers might be able to hear you, but if not, I can relay it. Thank you very much for that. Thanks.
Any questions? That was amazing, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful to sit through. Also, amazing to see you properly. Just going to say that.
I presume it is because it's quite a packed program. There's a lot of content, and I think people need a little bit of time to reflect on that. So a good thing, we don't have to always ask questions straight away. I think actually that's a good thing. We always take a little bit of time to reflect and more rigorously. Yes, thank you guys. Thank you very much. Hopefully one day we can bring you to Scotland in person rather than via Zoom. Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sophia. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Okay.
Take care. Bye.
So I think the next one on the program, we're going to head back to the marquee.
Hi guys. Sorry. Let's say thank you so much. That was great. So this was you, and we're gonna run along.
We're going to run it up. I think it's quite a lot. People are really taking constantly. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was great. Fantastic moment for people to quiet down to reflect on what you talked about.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
But absolutely, Oh yeah, the questions.
Hi.
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 I was just wondering to find out this was decision-making process and who is moving on the time that's decided and some sort of governing bodies, but I think from the Johannesburg more recently they've been trying to make that more like a public process. And I just wondered, what your thoughts on the decision-making process.
That's okay. I was thinking about that too, yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. I mean, for me, the thing that stuck out with Hector Peterson is like the amount of damage that happened, and not just in 77, the people who never came back, the people that we don't know where they are, the ghosts, and then to just say, no, we're only going to focus on the people that we know died. And so I think opening it up to the public allows for someone to say, hey, I have an uncle who I don't know if he's in Mozambique, I don't know if he's in exile, I don't know where he is. Can we add him to this? Because this isn't the toll. Yeah. Right. There's so many decisions that were probably made about how families moved on based on this. So you can't just say it's the people who died that experienced it.
And actually, when you talk about Hector Peterson, the interesting thing about that is that a lot of people didn't actually know who Hector Peterson was. So, the image is so popular and powerful, but people thought that Hector Peterson was the man carrying
The boy.
boy.
Yeah.
And actually, when that image obviously gained so much popularity and all of that, the man carrying the boy, he went into hiding. And there's even, there are a few documentaries that have been made, and he's not been found or identified. But this idea of like who we memorialize, again, when you're talking about, it's usually people who are dead. And it's like, this is the man that, played such a big role in, I guess.
And he lives with that in some way, and his family, because they know who he is, right? Yeah. And I think that's just what I meant by like, we need to expand like this idea, because just saying dead people are the only people who count. It's not the story.
And also, I think in the case of Hector, of that that entire movement, I think people sort of like think that these students were somewhat armed, or like, people sort of think that like there was a real force that was coming against the police, but actually they were just high school
students,
kids who were actually just making a strike in their school, and then they brought all the like armor and armed vehicles, and it was really an imbalanced situation. And so the force of the apartheid state is so apparent in that situation, but the fact that those students could even affect any kind of change is miraculous. And I think that what I took away was that no cause actually is something to take for granted. Like, students want to speak their local languages, or even a different language from Afrikaans, that then as oppressive as the Afrikaans. That's also a worthy cause. Like, no cause is like
less
than any other one, you know? So I think that that's what I personally like took away from.
Gosh, there's so much I want to talk about, but I'm like, the whole thing, this part of the program, everyone's left the room, moved on to the next. And I'm like the sole person sort of, wanting to keep the conversation going. But it's really, thank you so much.
No, thank you.
We really appreciate your questions. So thank you.
Take care. Are you closing the conversation?
I'm just going to say thank you so much for zooming in today. I think everyone really enjoyed the discussion, and I hope you have a wonderful day or night or whatever time it is where you are.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.